We are the body of Christ, who stretches inward and reaches outward. A body who grows, serves, and transforms lives through the love of Jesus Christ.
A reading from Genesis, chapter 18, verses 1 through 15, and then chapter 21, verses 1 through 7.
The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. He looked up, and he saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent entrance to meet them and bowed down to the ground.
He said, "My Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. Let me bring a little bread, that you might refresh yourselves. And after that, you may pass on, since you have come to your servant."
So they said, "Do as you have said."
And Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, "Make ready quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it, and make cakes." Abraham ran into the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant, who hastened to prepare it. Then he took curds and milk, and the calf that he had prepared, and set it before them, and stood by them under the tree while they ate.
They said to him, "Where's your wife, Sarah?"
And he said, "There in the tent."
Then one said, "I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife Sarah shall have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent entrance behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. It had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I've grown old and my husband is old, shall I have pleasure?"
And the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, "Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old? Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? At the set time I will return to you in due season, and Sarah will have a son."
But Sarah denied, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid.
He said, "Oh yes, you did laugh."
The Lord dealt with Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him.
Abraham gave him the name Isaac to his son whom Sarah bore him. Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him.
Now Sarah said, "God has wrought laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me." And she said, "Who would ever have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age."
This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Have you ever had one of those moments where you were so surprised, shocked even, that you couldn't help but laugh? Let me tell you about my brothers. My mother gave birth to 3 children. Fierce, fearless, and funny. The youngest, the 3rd child, my little brother named Dylan, is the funniest out of the 3 of us. His presence always gives birth to laughter. I remember one summer night, I was coming home late with my mother. We were returning to the ranch, driving down the dark road where you must watch out for wildlife, like deer, possums, armadillos, skunks. Well, that night, we encountered a different sort of wildlife. We pull into the ranch on that rocky dirt road with our eyes wide, making sure we didn't run into some large buck. But then suddenly, out of nowhere, a buck-naked figure comes running across the pasture wearing my little brother, was naked. No, not naked. Naked. Laughter erupts out of my mom and I as we see Dylan, my brother, in the buff, bolting across the barren landscape. And let me tell you, that is something you literally can't unsee for the rest of your life. Yes, sometimes life surprises us, unraveling our present reality, giving birth to laughter in the barren landscapes of our lives. Sarah, Abraham's not-so-young wife, has been barren her entire life. Barren, unable to give birth to children, unable to find her purpose and place among her people. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, a new, naked baby boy shocks her into laughter. But the story is more than just about a barren woman giving birth to a boy named Isaac, which his name literally means to laugh. No, this story is about Sarah's laughter. Sarah laughs because God has made laughter for us all. For laughter is the God-given gift of unexpected joy. And we could read story after story in our scriptures about how God has given this unexpected joy, has broken the grip of death, of hopelessness, of barrenness. This joyous laughter is the end of sorrow and weeping. Laughter is a biblical way of receiving a newness which we cannot explain. Like trying to explain why your brother is naked in the pasture. But this newness of God's joy is a sheer gift, underived, unwarranted. For Sarah, barrenness has now become ludicrous. It can now be laughed at because there is full joy. But it can be hard to find joy. Find joy when the rocky road of our lives jostles our hope up and down. You know, our lives never simply move from point A to point B. I mean, if we all gave testimony like John Brown did today, we would say that life is like a winding road, causing our lives to get unraveled along the way. I mean, let's look at Sarah and Abraham. Much happens prior to Sarah's miraculous pregnancy. In Genesis 12 and 15, God promises to make Abram a great nation. And then in Genesis 16, Sarah abuses her concubine, Hagar, and forces her to sleep with her husband. And then in Genesis 17, Abraham himself laughs in disbelief when God tells him, 100 years old, that he and Sarah, who's 90 years old, will bear a child. So what does this mean for Sarah and Abraham to receive this gift of a child in spite of their prior actions? You see, we often think that God's grace is given or withheld by God because of something we've done or haven't done. But in spite of our best or even our worst efforts, God's grace is a gift given to us all, not because of what we do, but because of who we are. We are loved children of God. The thing is, the pain and suffering that we all experience can keep us from receiving God's grace that has already been given to us. Sarah carries this pain of infertility and suffering of miscarriages into her old age. And then an angel appears and says that she's going to have a child. The surprise, disbelief, and perhaps joy that comes with that statement are likely as deep as her hurt has been for a very long time. And yes, our prayers aren't always answered in this way. But we can trust that sometimes Even after our lives fall apart, God can surprise us and unravels our plans with unexpected joy if we are willing to receive it. Experiencing the unexpected joy of God's grace is part of our journey of faith. And this story shows what a scandal and difficulty faith actually is. Faith is not a reasonable act which fits into the normal schemes of our lives. The promise of the gospel is not a conventional piece of wisdom that is easily accommodated to everything else we know. Embrace of this radical gospel requires shattering and unraveling of our expectations of current reality. I mean, how often do we become resigned to our own barren landscapes in our lives? I mean, we say things like, this is how it's always been, so nothing's going to change. How often do we get stuck in the cycle of, it just is what it is? I mean, Abraham and Sarah have, by this time, become accustomed to their own barrenness. They have resigned to their closed future. They have accepted the hopelessness as normal. But the gospel promise does not meet them in the receptive of hopelessness, but in hopeful resistance. Hope is all about resisting doubt. To resist the urge to give up joy in those dark moments of our lives. I wonder, what might it look like for you, for us, in our own disbelief to be unraveled into joy? This past year, we've all experienced trauma. Maybe not physical trauma, but psychological trauma. Children, youth, parents, people working, people not working, young, old, healthy, unhealthy, everyone is experiencing some level of post-traumatic disorder, like someone coming home from war. No matter who you are, your life has been unraveled in some way. At some point, you have found yourself stuck in a barren land of hopelessness, wandering and wondering if your world will ever change. You might even still be there in that barren landscape. Or maybe you've recently come out of it. Wherever you are today, I encourage you to find or to look for unexpected joy and to allow God's grace to be a gift, to perhaps even give birth to laughter in your own lives.
Here at Butyl Park Baptist Church, we are
an inclusive community of faith,
rooted in the love of Jesus Christ.
Grow, serving,
and transforming lives.